All right, welcome back. We are going to look at the Constitutional Convention. We talked in the last video, we were sort of ending on James Madison and the work he had done getting ready for the Constitutional Convention. So let us return. There it is. To it. So Constitutional Convention, May the September 1787. A couple of things to understand about the Constitutional Convention. We talk about there's 55 men, but all 55 are never there all at the same time. Some states' representatives showed up and then left, like the New York delegation left. Connecticut didn't send anybody until about 3 weeks before the whole thing was over. So there is a quorum enough to do work, but there's never a point where all 55 men are together at the same time. That never happens. Notes, there was not very good notes taken. Most of the notes we have are from Madison, but also from people's recollections, but there was no secretary taking notes at the time. So let's get into this. Madison showed up ready to roll with what he called the Virginia Plan. Now, again, Madison had been thinking about this new form of government for a long time, so it's no surprise that he showed up ready to roll. The legislature in Madison's plan would become bicameral. There would be a House based on population, elected by popular vote. So basically, the House of Representatives you have today is based on population, elected by popular vote. The Senate that he proposed would be very different from the Senate you have today. The Senate would also be based on population, but the Senate would be elected by the House. Remember, we talked about Madison wanting to keep the erratic fevers of popular opinion out of Congress as much as possible. And so that would have been why they would be elected by the House. And then the House and the Senate would elect the president. Madison did not want the president to be elected through a popular vote system. And so he would have the House and Senate elect the president. A few other things. Most notably, Congress would be able to veto state laws, something that Madison had talked about back in the Vices document from the previous lecture. So this is a very radical government that Madison is proposing. It was radical compared to the House, compared to the Articles of Confederation. It's radical compared to today's government. Okay? Congress does not veto state laws. The House and Senate do not elect the president. The Senate is equal. So it's very different from what we have today. The danger here is that the large states would have all the power. Now, as someone who lives in Texas, I don't have a problem with that. But the smaller states, not a big fan of this. So the smaller states threw together, and it is very improvisational when you sort of look at it, what's called the New Jersey Plan. And the New Jersey Plan would have essentially kept Congress the way it already was, just to say unicameral, but simply increased its power over tax, trade, and draft. Okay. So it does feel sort of like something thrown together at the last moment. I think, again, a lot of people were shocked at how prepared Madison was when he showed up in Philadelphia for the Congress. What we're eventually left with, your study guide calls it the Compromise Plan. Older stuff, older books or lectures might call it the Connecticut Plan. Either term is correct. But what it does is, in terms of Congress, it's bicameral. The House, exactly from the Virginia Plan. So the House is elected by population based on popular vote. So the House of Representatives, the way we have it today, comes from that. And then the Senate would be 2 per state rather than based on population. And senators would be elected by the individual state legislatures, and it remained that way until 1913. So during the 1700s, during the 1800s, U.S. senators were elected by state legislatures. Okay? So all of Texas's senators, from when we became a state, 1845, our senators, our U.S. senators, would have been elected by the Texas state legislature. And again, that system would have continued until 1913. Now, this thing about population brings up a question about the South's population, slaves. Because again, the House is based on population. And so our southern states, slave states, going to get seats based on population. And there was a lot of objection to this, particularly from a guy named William Patterson, who said that the slaves don't have the rights of citizens, so why should they be counted as citizens? And that's a good question. Southern states weren't going to start giving slaves rights. Why should they be counted as citizens when it comes to dividing up the House of Representatives based on population? Again, Patterson is not really asking a question about the morality of slavery. He is simply bringing up the hypocrisy of counting slaves as citizens without giving them the rights of citizens. Now, Southerners did not want slaves counted as property because taxes. Okay, property is taxed. And so Southerners didn't want their slaves counted as property, but they couldn't get them counted as citizens either. Abolition was brought up, right? Why not just abolish slavery? 5 of the states had already either abolished slavery or were in the process of it. And Benjamin Franklin, who in his later years had taken to hanging out with Quakers, who are this country's original abolitionists, brought up the idea of abolition, and it was not seriously entertained. For Southerners, abolition meant financial ruin. Let me find that quote. Without slave, this is a quote from a previous governor of South Carolina named Rollin Lowndes. Without slaves, this state is the most contemptible in the Union. The Negroes are our wealth. They are, in fact, our only natural resource. And in fact, 1/3 of Virginia's wealth was tied up in slavery. So slavery is, I mean, abolition isn't going to be embraced by the South. It's financial ruin. But even Northerners, other than those states that had already abolished slavery, weren't crazy about it either, because for Northerners, abolishing slavery would mean telling whites in their states that blacks and whites were equal. And that was not going to fly. The northern states may have been opposed to slavery, but that doesn't automatically mean that they thought blacks and whites were equal. So slavery is brought up, I mean, abolition is brought up. It is politely listened to out of respect for Benjamin Franklin, and then it is politely forgotten about for the rest of the convention. A couple of others. Oh, I should probably solution for slaves. As you no doubt are aware, the 3/5 compromise. So when counting population for the House and the Electoral College, which I'll get to in a moment, 5 slaves will be equal to 3 citizens. This is going to give the South much more power, political power, than they would have had, both in the House of Representatives and particularly when it comes to electing presidents in the Electoral College. In return, the importation of slaves ended in 1808. That was the deal. Had this compromise not been made, it's possible that Georgia, the Carolinas, and possibly Virginia would have bolted and seceded from the United States, which would have been a disaster for the country. Or maybe not. Maybe we should have just let them go and good luck and God bless, and we might have avoided a civil war that would kill 800,000 people 80 years later. I don't know. It's one of those questions that you kind of mull over. Another problem was the executive. What exactly does the executive do all day? There is no president. There's no position like the presidency to model on. The president is not a prime minister. The president is not a monarch. So again, this sort of leaves like, what exactly does the president do? Right? That's problem number one. Like, what exactly will the president do all day? Problem number two, how do you elect president? The popular vote idea was out. Our founding fathers, frankly, did not trust the popular vote. They thought that the common people were too stupid to be left with this kind of decision. And then third, can one person really embody the will of an entire nation? And that's really a philosophical question. There's no way to really answer that. There's no way that Barack Obama or Joe Biden truly embodied the will of every single American any more than Donald Trump embodies the will of every single American. So, as far as solutions to these, there's another problem: tyranny. How do you prevent the president from becoming a tyrant? So let's work these in reverse. As far as the tyranny goes, you create a system of checks and balances that will hopefully keep the president in line. And sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it doesn't work too well. Number three, again, this is a philosophical question. I don't really have an answer for that. Number two, the Electoral College, which I'll come back to in a second. Number one, the man will fill the position. And what that means is presidents are often a reflection of the man who is the president. George Washington was a very strong, decisive man. His presidency is strong and decisive. When we have weak presidents, it's typically because those are weak men. I'm thinking of your Warren G. Hardings, your chair warmer presidents. There's a Simpsons song called the Mediocre Presidents song that really sums it up. Taylor, Tyler, Fillmore, Hayes, people like that. So look that up on YouTube. You should easily be able to find it. So when we have a very strong president, it's usually because that is a strong person. Your Lincolns, your FDRs, your Teddy Roosevelts, so on and so forth. The Electoral College. Why do we have an Electoral College? For those of you who don't pay attention, the Electoral College is based on population and cast votes for the president. So, man, I am really misspelling president today. So Texas, I believe, has, let's see, let's find out for sure. And then the electoral votes. Does Texas have? Texas has 40 electoral votes. California has 54. Alaska has a lot less because it's all based on population. This means that you can win the Electoral College without winning the popular vote. Lots of people have done it. Abraham Lincoln did it. George Bush did it. Donald Trump has done it. Okay. So why do we have this archaic system? Why not just switch to a popular vote? One, founders did not trust the popular vote. They thought that we might elect a really dumb, venile, borderline evil, egotistical, preening jackass as president. And so they wanted basically a check on the popular vote. There might be a president who appeals to the worst instincts of our nature, and they did not want that person getting into the Oval Office. So initially, the Electoral College would be a way to actually prevent that from happening. Two, a popular vote would work against Southerners. The fact is, there are more citizens in the North and Central than there are in the South colonies. So it was felt that a Southerner would never have a fair chance of becoming president. But if it was done on population, then if you could grab Virginia, which at that time was a huge state, and New York, you would have a pretty good shot at capturing the vote, the election. And this worked out very well because 6 out of the first 7 presidents came from slave owning states. The only exception out of the first 7. Let me think for a second. Hold on. I got to write this down. Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Jackson. 5 out of the first 7 presidents, my bad, came from slave owning states. Washington, Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson. The only 2 non-Southerners are John Adams and John Quincy Adams. So by basing it on the Electoral College and basing on population, Southern states would have a bit more of a chance to get into the presidency, and that clearly worked. If I were to go all the way up to the first 16 presidents, let's see, Buren. The problem here, there's a lot of names I forget because we got some mediocre presidents after number 8. Yeah, it's still pretty tilted heavily towards slave rather than non-slave state presidents. We got some of those mediocre ones in there. That's why I'm having trouble remembering their names and where they came from. Final reason, it was pretty much assumed George Washington was going to be the first president. And everybody knew who George Washington was. And so the question then was, will anyone ever be as well known as George Washington to stand for the presidency? Right? Like if you look at our second president, John Adams is a regional figure. He is not a national figure. Thomas Jefferson was a regional figure. He was not a national figure. His authorship of the Declaration of Independence was not known. So it was felt that people in the Electoral College were the kind of people who really were into politics and would know the reputations of the people running for president. Okay? That sounds really dumb to us here in the 21st century with all of our instant news and all that kind of stuff. But ask yourself this before you talk about how dumb these people were for not knowing who was running for president. In the 2024 election, other than Trump and Harris, who else was running for president? In the state of Texas, 2024 Texas. Let's take a look. Give me just a second. (2024). Sorry, this is taking so long. There were 6 people who ran for president in the 2024 election. Can you, other than Trump and Harris, name any of them? With all of your fancy connections to the internet and instant news, can you name any of those other candidates? So maybe these old-timey people weren't quite as dumb as we might think they are for not knowing who was running for president. So that is the reason we get the Electoral College. Popular vote works against Southerners. Founders do not trust the popular vote. And again, would anyone ever be that well known? The Electoral College is the most unpopular part of the Constitution. There have been literally hundreds of attempts to kill it. It will not die. It is the Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers of the Constitution. Every time you try to kill it, you fail. All right. So that is our Constitutional Convention. The Constitution has to go out for what's called ratification, which basically means the states vote on it, yay, yes or no, and eventually the states vote on it. So about September of 1789 is when the Constitution goes into effect, with our first president, George Washington. And I will join you again in the George Washington video. And until I see you there, have a good day.